Hello everyone, my name is Amal, and today I will be discussing some do's and don'ts of interacting with a blind person. Now you may be wondering, do's and don'ts? Why do you need do's and don'ts for interacting with a blind person? Well, unfortunately, a lot of people are very confused about blindness. A lot of times when people meet a blind person for the first time, they panic and they get nervous and they're confused. They don't really know what to do. And so this can lead to a lot of well-meaning actions that can sometimes be offensive. So in this video, I will be discussing 10 different things that you should or shouldn't do when interacting with a blind person. Hopefully you find this video useful and you will have a larger knowledge bank about blindness. Now, different blind people will have different perspectives on this, so these are my 10 things. A lot of blind people would agree with a lot of them, but there's a lot of content out there. There are a lot of resources for this, but these are my top 10, so sit back and grab your popcorn and enjoy. Alright, so number 1. When you approach a blind person, remember... Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention, I am reading these off of my Mantis Q40, which is a refreshable braille display device. I love my Mantis. It's the best braille display, in my opinion, the best on the market, but anyway. Number 1, when you approach a blind person, remember to tell them who you are. This one is incredibly important. Incredibly important. Now, blind people oftentimes recognize recognize people based on voice. Now, recognizing voices is way different from recognizing faces. When you see a person's face once, it's in your memory. So even if you don't remember their name, if you see their face again somewhere, you'll recognize them. Now, when it comes to voices, it's a lot different. It's a lot more nuanced, and a blind person needs to spend a lot of time around a person in order to actually recognize their voice and for it to be in their memory. So that's why it's really important to tell a blind person who you are when you talk to them, so that there's no awkwardness, and that way the blind person knows how to continue with their conversation with you and not be confused. And context is a big part of it as well, but I'll talk about that later. Number 2, if you offer a blind person assistance and they decline, don't insist on helping. Now, this unfortunately has happened to me a lot, where people will offer assistance and I'm in a position where I'm fine, I don't really need help, I know my route, I'm not lost. And so, I'll politely say, oh, no thank you, but thanks for your concern. And they'll continue to insist on helping. They will continue to find reasons for why they believe I need help. And one instance I remember in particular was in 9th grade. I was walking from my science class to PE. And I knew the route, and so I'm a pretty fast walker, and I was, walking on my way, and as I'm walking, there was this one substitute teacher who stopped me and he said, "Let me get someone to help you." And I said, "Oh, no thank you, I'm okay, I know where I'm going." And he said, no, let me get someone. It'll be faster for you if someone helps you." And I, once again, said, "No thank you, I'm positive, I'm okay." And then he didn't listen to me, and he, called out to a random student and said, "Help her." He asked him to help me to class. And what I liked is the student turned to me and said, "Do you need help?" And I said, "Oh, no thanks." And so he went on his way, and then the teacher left me alone, and I continued my route. Now, the reason that you shouldn't insist on helping a blind person is because instead of coming off as kind, it begins to come across as disrespectful. Because what you're implying is that the blind person doesn't know their own abilities, doesn't know what's good for them, basically. and you're sort of robbing that person of their autonomy. So when a blind person says that they don't need assistance, just trust that they know what's best for them and that they know what they're doing, and, leave them alone. Number 3. If you would like to assist a blind person, ask if they need help. Never grab them while they are walking. Now this piggybacks off the second one. So if a person does say yes to your offer of assistance, ask them how they'd like to be guided, and let them tell you and teach you the right technique. And that's the best way to offer assistance respectfully to a blind person. Now, this has never really happened to me all that much, but sometimes, and I've heard of this happening to other blind people, but sometimes they'll be walking and someone will, for some reason, think that they need help, and they will grab the person. Just grab the person's arm or their shoulder without consent. And that can be incredibly terrifying for a blind person. And it should be common sense that you don't grab an unsuspecting stranger, because they will very likely lash out. So if you get accidentally, punched or slapped, it's not because the person meant to hurt you, it's because they don't know who you are or your intentions. You might know that your intention is to help that person, but keep in mind, that person was unsuspecting. They could not see you coming. And so if you just grab an unsuspecting person, you're just causing unnecessary distress for that person, and it's just not a very respectful or polite thing to do. So just remember to ask if you think a person needs help. Number 4. It's okay to use words like see or look when having conversations with a blind person. Now, this one makes me laugh a little bit, because for some reason, people have this idea that if they use any type of seeing related words in conversation in front of, with a blind person, that they're going to offend them. But that's just simply so far from the truth. It is not true at all, because as blind people, we incorporate words like look and see and watch all the time in our conversations. We are not going to alter our vocabulary to accommodate the disability. Imagine how awkward it would be if you said something like, "Oh, I went to the grocery store today and I felt the bananas." That just, it sounds clunky, it sounds awkward. Or if you were to say, "Yeah, I went to the theater and I listened to the new Spider-Man movie." No, I'm gonna say I watched the movie, because watching, yes, typically refers to vision, but you can also watch with your other senses, in the same way that if a person says that they heard a story, hearing could refer to hearing with your ears, but also, reading in a newspaper or being told by someone. So yes, it's totally fine to use those words in conversations. And when you say "see you later" to a blind person, it's totally fine, I promise. I did have someone apologize to me one time because they said "see you later," and I remember being very surprised by that. Number 5. Address blind people directly as opposed to speaking to the person they are with. Now, this unfortunately has happened to me so many times, I can't even count, and it's actually pretty upsetting. So sometimes when I'm with someone, so let's say at a restaurant, or I'm paying for an item at a store, the server or the cashier or whoever it is will speak to the person that I'm with as opposed to speaking directly to me. So what would she like to order today? One instance I remember in particular, which completely baffled me, because of just the irony of this situation. I was about 19 years old and I had an eye doctor appointment, and so my mom came in the room with me at this doctor's office, So the doctor walks into the room. He turns to my mother and asks her, "How old is she?" Keep in mind, I was 19, way beyond old enough to speak for myself. And so I spoke up before my mom could answer, and I said, "I'm 19 years old." And I just remember feeling incredibly angry and confused simply because this man was an eye doctor. I kind of thought that somebody who routinely deals with individuals who have vision problems would know better. And more than anything, I just felt really small and insignificant. And unfortunately, I have had other situations where people have done that. And it's not a nice thing to do. It's very demeaning to a blind person. And blind people can speak for themselves. Remember, blindness is a physical disability. It's the eyes that don't work, not the other senses. So if you want to know what a blind person wants or needs, or you want to talk to them, just speak to them directly. Number 6, when guiding a blind person, give detailed verbal directions. This is also important because obviously, blind people cannot see where they are, so it's important to note changes like differences in terrain, whether there are stairs, whether you're turning, whether you're stopping, any type of relevant details about the environment, even not just the directional, hazards or changes, but even like describing surroundings. So if you're walking with someone in a busy downtown area of a city, describe whether there are stores around. Maybe, read the signs out loud. Describe maybe if you see if you're people watching and you see something really notable, really interesting. It's important to describe things to blind people because blind people absorb the world around them through their other senses, and they can't just look around. So in a way, you're kind of bringing the world to them, if you will. Number 7, never pet a working guide dog. Now, I myself am not a guide dog user. I use a cane, but I have met people who use guide dogs, and one of the biggest rules is to never pet the dog while it's working. Now, the reason for this is that you'll confuse the animal. So guide dogs are very extensively trained to know how to guide a person, but we have to remember they are animals first and foremost. And so if you pet that animal while they're working, you're confusing their training. So now they think that it's time to play. So once you pet them, they're gonna be distracted and they're not gonna be able to perform what, the training that they're supposed to be doing. They're not gonna guide the person well. And by petting the dog, you're basically putting the blind person in danger. So if the blind person says that you can pet the dog and it's not wearing its harness, then sure, but do not pet a guide dog unwanted. I apologize for the helicopter noise in the background, by the way. Alright, number 8. Don't make assumptions about what a blind person is or is not able to do. If you are unsure, just ask. Now this one is one of the things that a lot of times is very overlooked as a problem because people don't talk about it a ton, and you only really see people talk about this in TED Talks and speeches, but a lot of times people do make implicit just assumptions about what a blind person can and can't do. Well, the assumptions themselves are kind of explicit, but they're based on very subconscious ideas about a person's abilities. So for example, one thing that sticks with me even today is a situation when I was in the 6th grade. I was friends with this girl named Catherine. We were like best friends that year, and we'd eat lunch together and talk. And one day she asked me if I liked ice skating, and I said, yeah, I like it, it's fun, but I'm not that good at it. And then she said that a few months ago, or I don't know how long ago, but a while ago, she had had an ice skating birthday party and that she was going to invite me, but she didn't because she was afraid I would fall. Now, at that point, I had really wished that she had just kept that to herself, because it made me kind of sad. It made me sad because this was a person I considered a friend, yet she completely excluded me. In fact, I didn't even know that her birthday had been coming up because we had only met that year, but she'd completely excluded me from what could have been a really fun time simply because she made an assumption. She made an assumption about what I could or couldn't do. And when I think about this situation in particular, if I fell while ice skating, why would that have been, a big deal? There are a lot of people who fall while doing sports or any type of, risky activity. Professional figure skaters have fallen and injured themselves. So even if I had fallen, it wouldn't have been related to my eyesight. And so just make sure that if you do have some kind of doubts about a person's abilities, ask them first. Because sometimes a lot of times, exclusion of a blind person looks more like you don't care about them, and that's the way it comes across to the person. It comes across somewhat as a betrayal. Alright, number 9. Don't treat blind people like babies. This one may sound vague, but unfortunately a lot of times people will see the cane and they will start to talk to a blind person in the same tone that you might use with a child or an infant, that kind of high-pitched, overly sweet tone, or possibly even a slower tone of voice. And again, that one, needless to say, is incredibly insulting, especially when you are a capable adult in a space with other respected, capable adults, and you get spoken to as if you're a child. Again, blindness is a physical disability. It is just the eyes that don't work. So please be respectful of that and speak to blind people the way you would speak to anybody else. Number 10, it's okay to ask questions about blindness as long as they are appropriate. This one is also very important, as are all of these, but a lot of sighted people, when they meet a blind person, they have a lot of questions. Most blind people will tell you that they are more than happy to answer the questions, myself included. But again, make sure that the questions fall into the appropriate boundary. So I'm totally okay with talking about how I use technology, how I get around, how I identify people, how I experience the world. There's so many questions that people have had, and I am 100% okay with talking about it. But I've heard that some people get asked very intrusive questions, very inappropriate questions that you wouldn't really get away with asking someone else. So questions related to personal hygiene and, other topics that you wouldn't typically discuss with someone. So the important rule of thumb here is if it's a question that you would not ask a sighted person, then maybe you should hold off asking the blind person as well. Now, another side note in relation to the questions is do not directly ask a blind person a question about how they became blind. Now, for me personally, I don't have a problem answering that because, there's no emotion attached to it. I've been blind since I was a baby. I was a preemie. I had a condition, a medical condition. So for me, I don't have problems with it, but there are other people who became blind due to something very traumatizing, whether it's an accident, whether, some people, they were victims of gun violence. Some people became blind from suicide attempts. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why a person associates pain with that experience. So unless you know a person well and you're having a deep conversation, it is never a conversation starter. It is never a good idea to come right out with, "So, how did you become blind?" or "How long have you been blind?" People have started conversations with me that way, and I still find it weird. I mean, there's no pain associated with it, but it is a weird way to start a conversation. So again, it all comes down to just make sure to be respectful of the person that you're speaking with. So this concludes my list of do's and don'ts for interacting with a blind person. I hope that you found this information useful, and I hope you're able to apply it when you meet a blind person. And like I said before, it all does come down to respect and understanding that blind people are people just like you. They have autonomy just like you, so treat them like you would treat anybody else, and just keep these things in mind. Alright, so this concludes the video, and I'll see you in the next one.